Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Rich Sports Talk, your home for all the latest and greatest in New York sports. If you are new to the channel, hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any of our latest content. Super chat to jump to the front of the line. And if you want to take us on the go and can't join us on our YouTube live stream, you can check us out wherever podcasts are available. So, I wanted to talk about this because this has been something that I've talked about a couple times on this program. That has been Joe Schoen with the Giants. And I look at this move by the Giants, and I'll be frank, I don't understand why Joe Schoen got to keep his job. Because if you were to ask me in a vacuum who I thought did a better job at their job, Brian Dable or Joe Schoen, I would have said Brian Dable did a better job coaching. Because Jackson Dart looked pretty good under him. And you also look at the stats when Brian Dable left, Jackson Dart was not the same quarterback. And now, granted, Joe Schoen, again, I think did what he had to do. He saved space. And the one thing I don't like about this, too, is the revisionist history from Joe Schoen. All of a sudden, Joe Schoen claiming, oh, yeah, I was the one that wanted Jackson Dart, when we all know that it was Brian Dable who pounded the desk and wanted this quarterback. And now this quarterback is saving his job. And granted, if you draft the right quarterback, it does save a lot of face. You look around, if you're able to draft the quarterback, you can make a lot of mistakes. You can draft an all-pro roster, but if you miss on the quarterback in the draft, you are not going to keep your job. There's a lot of reasons why I don't think Joe Schoen should be the head coach. The general manager of the New York Giants. Sorry for the slip up there. There's plenty of reasons. I just look at the background. What has he done exceptionally well as a GM? This is a GM that is 22-45-1. And let's be frank, if the Cowboys basically didn't decide to punt on the last half of the game, they could be 21-46-1. It is not a good situation as a GM going into this offseason, because I also look too, do they think part of the reason was this wasn't going to be an attractive location for a general manager? Because the Giants don't have a ton of cap space. They don't have a ton of moves, and they have some big decisions to make this offseason. But I just look back at Joe Schoen, and I look back at the track record. What does he do well? He's not really a crafty trader, in my opinion. He hasn't been great in free agency, and I look at the drafts, and outside of Jackson Dart, yeah, there's been some nice hits, but they've been pretty lackluster. And if I'm honest, he's had some of the bigger busts in Giant history under his watch. The handling of Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones is also alarming. They could have easily signed Saquon to a long-term deal. They didn't. They could have tagged Daniel Jones, and they didn't. He has made a lot of mistakes as the general manager of the Giants. The problem is I don't feel like he's really learned from them. I don't think they've really learned from those lessons. And now, again, I just look at this offseason. And the biggest worry I have for Giants and their Giant fans is this. It's all about timelines in the NFL. And when I look at Joe Schoen, I don't like the fact that he's going to be on a different timeline than this head coach. And that's another thing. I know they're going to interview Kevin Stefanski. It was reported today that Stefanski is going to interview with the Giants. But if keeping Joe Schoen eliminates you from getting your top candidate, to me, that is just foolish. Because I do think a lot of these head coaches, they want to have their say in personnel. And there's another reason that, again, I'm worried about Joe Schoen. I'll get to in a little bit. But when I just look at the potential coaches, especially some of the big names, if Harbaugh becomes available from the Ravens and decides, I don't want to go to the Giants because they won't let me have control of personnel, you look back and that could be a huge mistake for this Giant team. I just look at all the options out there. And look, Kevin Stefanski, I think, would be an okay option. I think he's done a good job with quarterbacks. But right now, you have an attractive job because of your young quarterback. And if you're the Giants and you screwed up because you had to keep this general manager, a general manager that is 22-45-1 at his profession, that to me is just mind-blowing. And I just look back at the history of Joe Schoen. And I look at this offseason. This is going to be a tough offseason because he's been here for 4 seasons. And the offensive line is going to need an overhaul. But the problem is the Giants are limited with their picks and they're limited with cap space. Right now projected as $11 million. With a couple of moves and cuts, they can probably get to $20 million, but that's not a lot of wiggle room in the National Football League. And then you look at you look at the free agents, Jermaine Almanor, Evan Neal, Greg Van Roten. I mean, these are key offensive line pieces that are not going to be a part of this team next year. Joshua Zaidu. I mean, how are they going to replenish the offensive line? And I just look back at the drafts. If he's keeping his job because of Abdul Carter and Cam Scadaboo, last year's draft was okay. And again, they made a shrewd move to get Jackson Dart. They were very fortunate. But when I look at the whole of Joe Schoen's draft history, that's really where he's been building this roster. And the other thing I keep hearing from Giants fans is he's built such a great young core. He's built such a great young core. He's built such a great young core. I would make the case that he hasn't built a great young core, partially because you look at the records, they have not been good. And let's also be frank, Joe Schoen also could have potentially had the number one pick in this draft if they had shut everything down the last 2 weeks. But instead, they win 2 games, including a final game over the Cowboys, to get the 5th pick. And look, it's still going to be a valuable draft pick. But the Giants also will not have as much ammo as they've had in the past. They don't have a 3rd-round pick for the Jackson Dart move this year. They are limited in the back half of the draft. As you look right now, the Giants have their 1st, their 2nd-round pick, no 3rd, a 4th, a 5th, 3 6s, but no 7s. And when I look at this GM, I haven't seen a guy that can develop talent or find talent late in the drafts. You get a good one once in a while, like a Tyrone Tracy Jr., maybe a Theo Johnson. But I look back, Deontay Banks has been an absolute bust. John Michael Schmitz has been a disappointment. Jalen Hyatt has been a huge disappointment. And even you look back at the first draft, 2022, Kayvon Thibodeau has been a nice player, but he doesn't feel like the 5th overall player in the draft. Evan Neal has been a complete disaster. Wan'Dale Robinson, now you have to make a decision on him if he's coming back. Cordell Flott, is he coming back? There's a lot of pieces that are on the chopping block. And not to mention, whoever the new head coach is going to be is going to want certain players to fit their scheme, to fit their system. And I just look right now, I just don't have confidence in Joe Schoen because Joe Schoen, I thought, butchered the Saquon Barkley deal. And it's not just that he didn't sign him to a contract. You have a great asset in Saquon Barkley, and a GM has to effectively manage assets and understand the value of those assets. When the Giants made the decision that they were not going to extend him, and on Hard Knocks, I vehemently disagreed. He told everyone, well, we're not going to franchise Saquon. I'm like, what are you, nuts? He's like, well, we're probably not going to get a ton. I would take anything. If you're going to let Saquon walk out the door, you might as well control where he goes and get a draft pick. I'd rather, if I was the Giants, have traded him to the AFC for a 3rd-round draft pick than have him go down I-95 and help the Eagles win the Super Bowl. That, to me, was incredibly alarming, how he handled that situation. How he puffed out his chest during Hard Knocks saying, I'm going to rebuild this offensive line. Devin Singletary is going to be a great addition to this team, and how that ended up coming around. I just find it very funny that Joe Schoen, I don't know what it is, because from all measurables, he shouldn't have a job. And I will warn Giant fans about this, because I know Giant fans don't like to hear this, but the last decade, the Giants and the Jets have basically been the same team. The difference now is at least the Giants have a young quarterback that you feel can be a potential franchise quarterback. But I always say, look to other lessons around the National Football League. What did happen to the Jets? The Jets have been on multiple timelines, and that is one of the biggest reasons that they have had a 15-year playoff drought. They had to keep Rex Ryan as their head coach. What did that lead to? It led to John Idzik, who was one of the worst general managers we have ever seen. The Jets then do what you think you're supposed to do, bring in Mike Maccagnan and Todd Bowles at the same time, but then they don't fire them both. They let Mike Maccagnan keep his job. And guess what? Mike Maccagnan got to hire a head coach, Adam Gase. And then do you remember what happened that year? We went through the offseason and we went through the draft, and the day after the draft, it was revealed that Adam Gase had made the decision to relieve Maccagnan of his duties and bring in Joe Douglas. Is there a scenario, and I will throw this out there, is there a scenario where Joe Schoen's allowed to go through this offseason, allowed to go through the draft, and then right after the draft is replaced? That could definitely be a scenario, ladies and gentlemen, and I don't think it's out of the question because I've seen it before. Who's to say? Maybe the head coach, like, let's say it's a Kevin Stefanski, just spitballing. What if Kevin Stefanski, after the draft, goes, you know what? I'm not happy with the players we brought in. I know a guy from Cleveland, or I know someone that I know will get the personnel I need. So then you kept Joe Schoen through an offseason, allowed him to make key personnel decisions, only for the head coach to eventually get rid of him. And what happens next year? Let's say Joe Schoen makes it through the offseason, makes it through the draft. What if we get through a full season next year? The Giants are 6-11 or 7-10, and then they have to make the decision, well, do we keep Joe Schoen, or the head coach decides, I want personnel change, or I want a guy that I trust more, and I'm going to bring in my guy. And then you move on from Joe Schoen. But we're forgetting a huge part of this. What is the key to the Giants' success? It's Jackson Dart. And during this time period, you are just wasting, in my opinion, valuable time. And you have a GM that, let's face it, failed with the previous quarterback. He had Daniel Jones, and I understand Daniel Jones has his faults and his injuries. But did Joe Schoen build a successful team around Daniel Jones? No. Did he build a successful offensive line around Daniel Jones? No. The most successful offensive lineman for the New York Giants is Andrew Thomas, who is Dave Gettleman's pick. What great offensive lineman has come in and developed under Joe Schoen? Yeah, they've plugged some decent holes. They haven't had a huge tackle in free agency, but they've gotten some okay value. But if you were to ask how good this Giants offensive line is, it feels like it's never a top 20 unit in the sport. Simply, Joe Schoen cannot build an offensive line. And trust me, I saw it with the Jets. Joe Douglas had 6 years to build an offensive line, and it took him almost 6 years. You cannot miss on offensive lineman when you're developing a young quarterback. And look, this is a key draft. How are you using that 5th pick? Do the Giants try to move back a couple spots? Do they try to get some more capital? Because reminder, they don't have the 3rd pick this year, their 3rd round pick this year. But you look at this draft, they're going to have some key decisions. They're going to have some guys in that range where you're going to have to make a key decision. Is there a world where they entertain Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame? Could you imagine the Giants take another running back in the top 5? Are they in range for Reuben Bain Jr.? Because again, do you move off of Kayvon? Do you look to add more pieces as a defensive line? Do you look to add like a Jordan Tyson, a great receiver to pair with Malik Neighbors? Do they go with the cornerback route? And if I was to ask you, I feel like Giant fans have asked, do you trust Shane to take a receiver? I think they'd be like, I think he can get it right. But if I was to say, can Joe Schoen draft a corner early or a defensive back? I feel all Giant fans would go, heck no, we don't want him. The other question, too, is do they take a sensible pick? Do they go offensive line? Now, again, I don't think that there's a standout like an Armand Menbu at the top, but there's guys like a Spencer Fano from Utah who I think can be a good tackle. I think that you look at Francis Mayoga from Miami, again, 6'6", 325. You just look and you just ask yourself, can Joe Schoen give this offense their best weapons? Because let's be frank, outside Malik Neighbors, he got rid of the best offensive weapon the Giants had in the last decade in Saquon Barkley. They haven't been good at adding receivers. They've been okay at adding tight ends, and they've really whiffed on the offensive line. And outside of the defensive line, do you think he can find a linebacker in the mid-rounds? Do you think he can find some defensive back help? And I keep getting back to this because I hear it over and over again. The Giants have a good young core. The Giants have a good young core. The Giants have a good young core. Okay, they have Jackson Dart, who I think is a really good young quarterback. They have Malik Neighbors, who when healthy is a dynamic wide receiver. Abdul Carter, again, has his issues. I need to see another full season, but the way he ended the season, I'm feeling a little bit more positive. And you have Brian Burns. Like, outside of that, Dexter Lawrence has felt like a bit of a disappointment the last year. The offensive line has not been great. I mean, where are all these great young pieces in this great young core? And this is the other trap that I worry the Giants are going to fall into. And again, I bring up the Jets because these two franchises have been very similar the last 10 years, even though Giant fans don't want to admit it. The Jets are in a position now, which is not enviable. But part of the reason they're in this position is I think many people like myself, many people in the media, many people that look at that team overvalue the talent that was truly there. I still think that the Jets are not getting the talent, the amount out of the talent that they have with Aaron Glenn. But that's another thing. You can go check out our other episodes for that. But I just look at this giant group, and I just look, do we slightly over evaluate the talent on this team? Because let's also be frank, this team with that defense should not have blown those leads this year. Like, you look at that defensive line, think about the investment that has been made, multiple picks in millions of dollars in Brian Burns, a first round top 5 pick in Kayvon Thibodeau. Dexter Lawrence is a top 15 pick. Abdul Carter, a top 5 pick. And you look at how that defense finished, it felt underwhelming. And look, there's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of, quote, talent, but the talent didn't come through this year. The talent wasn't able to close off games. The issue, I thought this year was going to be the offense, and the offense got plenty of leads this year, but it was the defense that could not close those games. And you look at the back end of this secondary, horrendous. They overdrafted players. They've not been good. Do I trust that with limited picks and with limited capital, all of a sudden Joe Schoen's going to rebuild the secondary in an offseason? I don't. And the other thing, too, is we look at the holes on this team, and you look at learning from mistakes. Joe Schoen even said in his press conference, I have to learn from my mistakes. I'm learning from my mistakes. Can you remind me then how Graham Gano was the kicker this year? Because that was a mistake that has reared its ugly head time after time after time. How many times have the Giants gone into a game with a hurt kicker or a kicker without a kicker because they were hurt in the preseason? You knew Graham Gano could not stay healthy, yet you kept bringing him back here. You kept putting your team at a disadvantage in multiple games. So you didn't learn from that mistake. Are they going to bring Graham Gano back for another round? You never know at this point with Joe Schoen, and I can't rule it out. And the thing is, do I think with better coaching, this team can be better and can Jackson Dart take a big step next season? Absolutely. But I just look at this Giants team. They're going to lose arguably one of their receivers in free agency. I just look at the Giants and I go, outside of the defensive line where they've invested a plethora of talent, outside of Malik Neighbors, outside of Jackson Dart, outside of, let's say, Cam Scatterbo if he's healthy, what great core do the Giants have? Like, I'm just looking right now. Right now, you finished the season with Marcus Membu at left tackle. Is he going to be able to hold it down the full season? I thought he played well in reserve. But if Andrew Thomas is out there, that's a comeback. You're losing your right tackle and Jermaine. Does he come back? Are you able to draft and fill those positions? Are you able to add another tight end to the room with Theo Johnson? Like, I just look around this Giant team, and I just don't see a team where I really, outside the defensive line, I don't love the linebacking core. I definitely don't like the secondary. So are they going to be able to fill? Because don't forget, right now they have $11 million in cap. They're going to have, with some moves I think they're going to make with some cuts, they can get to 20. Those are a lot of those fill-in gap guys or filling out the roster or filling out the depth. Like, maybe the Giants get one big-ish free agent. But to me, the way they improved this roster is through the draft. And do I trust Joe Schoen to make those decisions? Because right now the Giants, if you look at the draft right now, they have 7 picks, but they don't have a third. They don't have a 7th. They have 3 6s, a 4, and a 5. Do they move up in from round 2 to get back into round 1? Do they move back in round 2 to get more picks? Do they move back from pick 5? Look, I don't think there's going to be a quarterback that a team's going to want to come up for. But right now, when you look at the Giants and their draft order, they're picking 5th, which I also know has to drive some Giant fans nuts because 2 weeks ago they had the number 1 pick, and now all of a sudden they're picking 5th in the draft. To me, you have to look at who's behind them. It's going to be Cleveland. Is there a team that's going to want to jump the Cleveland Browns to maybe get a receiver? Is there a team that wants to jump ahead of the Browns to get a playmaker? But on the next breath, do the Giants want to get a playmaker? Because right now, where the Giants are picking, I think Carnell Tate is certainly an option out of Ohio State, another great wide receiver. I think Jeremiah Love is someone that, again, I don't think they'd pick him at 5, but if you move down a couple slots, does he come into play? Caleb Downs is a guy, if you trade down a couple spots, comes into play. Or do they do something expensive like Spencer Fano from Utah becoming their offensive tackle? The thing is, I just look at this draft too. There's a lot of great corner prospects, but if you had to ask me, do I trust Joe Schoen to draft secondary? I absolutely do not. And I just look at the timelines again, comments, super chat to jump to the front of the line. I just look at the way the Giants have operated the last 4 years. I just don't see it getting much better. And I just don't agree at the timelines. And right now, you have a key window. You have Jackson Dart on his rookie contract. And if keeping Joe Schoen limits the coaches you can get this offseason, or limits the quality of a head coach you can get, because maybe Joe Schoen doesn't want to get a big name because he knows the big name probably will win out. And if the big name doesn't like his personnel moves, he's probably on the way out. Does that mean he takes a shot on an unknown offensive coordinator? Does it mean he takes a shot on an unproven coach so he has a more power dynamic in the room? That's something you have to be concerned about. And I think it's very real. Like, there could be a world where Kevin Stefanski comes in, has a great interview, and Joe Schoen looks in the mirror and says, if Jackson Dart has a great year next year, but I don't put the pieces around him, he's going to go to ownership and tell ownership, I know what I'm doing. The GM doesn't let me get my guy. And at the same token, what is at stake here? It's Jackson Dart. You not only have to get the right coach to continue developing this kid, but you cannot waste valuable time. You have Jackson Dart on a rookie contract for 4 seasons. You get the 5th-year option. Again, it will be a bump in pay, but it's still manageable. Are you really going to waste half of that rookie contract just trying to figure out the GM situation, trying to figure out the timeline situation? I felt that when Joe Schoen was kept, that it was a massive mistake because people need to be held accountable. And Brian Daboll, I understand, had his faults. I understand Brian Daboll made a miss at his defensive coordinator hire. But if you want to credit someone with why Jackson Dart is the Giants quarterback, you should be thanking Brian Daboll. And right now, it just feels weird that Joe Schoen is hiding behind that Brian Daboll shield of Jackson Dart, saying, well, I was the one that actually picked the quarterback. We've seen all the videos. Go up and get your guy. The room was split on him. It was 50-50. And Brian Daboll said, get me my quarterback. And you saw when Brian Daboll was fired, Jackson Dart, again, played well down the stretch, but for a good period of time, he was not the same quarterback. And I understand that the defenses blew games this year, but a lot of this personnel, a lot of the groceries, and a lot of the reasons the cap is the way it is because of Joe Schoen. Like, let me ask you, has Joe Schoen, outside of Embo, who I think could develop into a starting offensive lineman, what offensive lineman has he drafted and then they've developed? Who's been a great playmaker outside of Malik Neighbors in one of the deepest wide receiver classes we've ever seen, has really developed into a great wide receiver? What defensive back has really developed into a great defensive back? And even I'll say the defensive ends. Abdul Carter came on late in the season, finished second in the team in sacks. But you've already seen there might be some issues here. So you have to get a good coach, defensive coordinator, or head coach that can control him. But you look back at the 2022 draft, and they made the decision. And I said at the time for the 2022 draft, it was going to be a life-changing draft for the better or worse of both New York teams. The Jets got Sauce Gardner, who was an all-pro for them for 2 years, and now has netted them 2 first-round picks. They got Garrett Wilson, who's a great wide receiver. That draft for the Giants, 5th and 7th picks, were Evan Neal at number 7 and Kayvon Thibodeau. And look, Thibodeau has been a fine defensive end. If he was picked 15 to 30, you'd say that was a great value. But when you're picking number 5 in the draft, you're expecting someone that's a perennial all-pro or darn close to it. And I like Kayvon Thibodeau. I really think he's developed into a very nice football player. But we thought this was going to be a perennial double-digit sack guy, and he has not become that. And you just look at the players on that board and what has become a very great draft class. Giants Could have taken Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Charles Cross. Charles Cross now just got, I don't know if you saw it, $100 million extension with the Seahawks. Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, Jordan Davis, Kyle Hamilton. This was a loaded draft early. And even offensive line, Tyler Smith later, Tyler Linderbaum, Jermaine Johnson. This was a really deep class, especially early. And the Giants walked away with Kayvon Thibodeau. They walked away with Evan Neal, who's not even going to be on the team next year, and who didn't have a plan. Like, if I was the Giants, I would have tried to make him at least an offensive guard, try to figure that out, but they weren't able to. I just look at this Giant team, and it just, to me, feels like they needed a hard reset at the end of the season. And I'm just telling you from experience, because I've seen it and I've lived it. It is not fun when you see coaches and GMs on different timelines, because they will make irrational decisions. I think, you know what? There's a world where Joe Schoen goes nuts and trades a bunch of draft picks, puts the Giants in a lot of dead cap the next 2 years because he's trying to save his job with deferred money. We've seen guys who know they're on the hot seat do crazy things. Is that the best interest for this team, where the next general manager is going to come in with less draft picks, without ammunition in free agency, without cap space? It doesn't make sense. And there's a world too, if you're just keeping him around for the draft, it doesn't make sense. Because I saw a team do this. It was called the Jets. They did it with Mike McCagnon. They let him go through the whole offseason, pick the draft, and then after the draft, oh, he's been relieved of his GM duties. It's like, what? That doesn't make sense. To me, I would have just had a clean break. I don't know if it's the ownership loves Shane. I don't know if he's gone in their ear. I don't know if he's just clinging on to Jackson Dart. But I just look at it this way, and this is my final point. Joe Schoen didn't draft Daniel Jones, and I understand that wasn't his guy. But Joe Schoen had a task, and it was build a healthy environment around that quarterback to help him succeed. In that first year, the Giants did a great job. But since then, they have not put the tools around, because it's not just for Daniel Jones. They could have laid a foundation for Jackson Dart to have a great offensive line, to have great playmakers. And Joe Schoen has had this job for 4 years, 3 of which were trying to put pieces around Daniel Jones to help him succeed. And we saw it in Indianapolis for 8 games this year when Daniel Jones was healthy and he had pieces. Looked like a pretty darn good quarterback. And look, I think Jackson Dart has elevated a lot of the talent on this team. I think the offensive line plays differently, and I still don't think it's a good offensive line when he's out there. You can tell he brings an energy to the room, that he is something special. But trusting someone that has already proven that they cannot build a team around a young quarterback, someone that has missed multiple times on offensive linemen, on wide receivers, and on defense, to me, is almost just negligent letting him have this job. And look, I understand that Cam Scatterbo has been a darling for this team and is great publicity and has been a great player to follow for this team. But if the reason that he's keeping his job is because he drafted just Jackson Dart and Cam Scatterbo, I want to remind people what his record is. Because your record is what you are. 22, 45, and 1. And there's a chance that the Giants lost their last 2 games. This would have been a 20, 47, and 1 record. And part of me wonders, would the Giants have been better out bottoming out, getting the number 1 or 2 pick, and that way moving on from Joe Schoen? Is part of the reason they're keeping Joe Schoen is they just don't see a better option at this point. Overall, I think keeping Joe Schoen will likely be a giant mistake for the New York Giants. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Rich Sports Talk. We'll be back with more great New York Giants and New York sports content throughout the offseason. Make sure to give us a like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our latest videos. And if you want to check us out, you can always check us out wherever podcasts are available. And you can also check us out on social media using the hashtag Rich Sports Talk and the handle Rich Sports Talk. Until next time, I'm your host, Nolan Rich, and this has been Rich Sports Talk.